In 1966, psychologist Elliot Aronson wanted to answer a question that seemed almost too simple to study. Do we like perfect people, or do we like them less? He built a fake quiz show and recorded 4 versions of the same contestant. In one version, the contestant answered 92% of the questions right, a nearly perfect performance. In another version, the same contestant answered only 30% right, clearly mediocre. Then he added a twist. In half the recordings, near the end of the tape, the contestant knocked over a cup of coffee, fumbled it, and got visibly flustered and embarrassed. Aronson played these tapes to groups of people and asked a simple question afterward. How much do you like this person? The results should have been obvious. The competent one wins, the clumsy one loses. End of story. That is not what happened. The most liked version of all 4 was the brilliant contestant who spilled the coffee. Not the flawless genius, not the average person, the genius who fumbled. Something about watching a clearly capable person become human for 3 seconds made him more likable than being flawless ever could. Psychologists later gave this a name, the Pratfall Effect, and for decades it stayed mostly inside academic journals about persuasion and likability. But there is a second, quieter version of this effect that almost nobody talks about, and it might explain more about attraction and falling for someone than the original study ever intended. Ask most people what makes someone attractive, and you get a predictable list. Confidence, success, looks, being put together. There is truth in that. Competence matters. We are drawn to people who seem capable of handling their lives. But research on what actually creates emotional pull between 2 people tells a stranger story. In 1997, psychologists Arthur Aron and Elaine Aron ran a study that became famous, sometimes nicknamed the 36 Questions Experiment. 2 strangers sat in a room and worked through questions that escalated in intimacy, starting light and ending in genuinely personal territory, followed by 4 minutes of sustained eye contact. The questions were not designed to showcase anyone's achievements or charm. They were designed to reveal something slightly unfinished, slightly uncertain, slightly real. What the Arons found was that closeness did not build through impressive stories. It built through small admissions, a person naming a fear, a person admitting they still call a parent when things go wrong. The pairs who exchanged this kind of information reported significantly higher closeness afterward than pairs who exchanged only surface facts. Some participants from that original study even ended up getting married. The mechanism was never charisma, it was the visible crack. Here is why this happens. It comes down to how the brain treats certainty versus uncertainty in another person. When someone presents as completely polished with no visible seams, your brain files them the way it files a photograph or a statue, something to admire from a distance, not something to reach toward. Admiration is not the same feeling as attraction. Admiration keeps people at arm's length because perfection implies self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency does not need you. But the moment a real, unscripted flaw appears, something shifts. The other person stops being a finished object and becomes a process, something unfolding, something that might need you, or at least might let you in. Sociologist Sidney Girard studied this decades earlier under the term self-disclosure, and found something almost mathematical about closeness. Vulnerability shared by one person tends to be met with vulnerability from the other, a small trait psychologists call the disclosure reciprocity effect. Each honest admission lowers the emotional temperature just enough for the other person to lower theirs too. That is the actual machinery underneath the phrase opening up. It is not poetic. It is a documented feedback loop, and it happens in seconds, not months. Now, here is where most advice on this topic gets it backwards. If vulnerability alone made someone attractive, oversharing your problems on a first date would work every time. It does not. Aronson's original study had a detail almost nobody mentions. Remember, there were 4 versions of the tape. When the average performer, the one who got only 30% right, spilled the coffee, he was not rated more likable. he was rated less likable than the version of himself who never spilled anything. If you already come across as unremarkable and then visibly stumble, the brain does not read it as charming humanity. It reads it as confirmation. There is a prerequisite buried inside this whole effect that almost never gets said out loud. You have to establish some baseline of competence or value first. The flaw only works as a bridge if there is already something solid on the other side of it. Vulnerability, without demonstrated substance underneath it, does not read as endearing. It reads as a warning sign. And people's instincts pick up on that difference almost immediately, often before they can explain why. There is a second requirement, just as unforgiving. The vulnerability has to be real. People are shockingly good at detecting a performed flaw versus an authentic one, even when they cannot say exactly what tipped them off. A rehearsed, self-deprecating joke lands differently in the nervous system than a genuine, unplanned moment of awkwardness. Researchers studying authenticity in social interactions have found that manufactured vulnerability, the kind designed specifically to appear relatable, tends to trigger the same skepticism that manufactured perfection does. Aronson's coffee spill worked precisely because it sounded like an accident, because the actor committed to sounding genuinely mortified rather than cute about it. The moment vulnerability becomes a strategy instead of an accident, it stops functioning as connection and starts functioning as manipulation. And somewhere underneath conscious awareness, the other person clocks it. So if you are looking at this from the angle of what actually draws someone towards you rather than what just impresses them, here is the shape of it. Competence gets you noticed. It is the floor, not the ceiling. It tells the other person you are not a project, not someone they need to fix or worry about. But competence alone keeps you at a comfortable, respectful, slightly cold distance, the same distance you would keep from someone you admire on a stage. What actually collapses that distance is the small, unscripted moment afterward. The joke that falls flat and you laugh at yourself instead of recovering smoothly. The story about a time you got something wrong, told without the varnish that usually protects your image. These moments work not because they lower your value, but because they signal you are not performing, that what the other person is seeing is actually you and not a curated version built for approval. That distinction, real versus performed, is the entire hinge the whole effect swings on. This is also why timing matters more than people assume. Leading with vulnerability before anyone has a reason to respect you rarely works, because there is nothing yet for the crack to reveal. But burying every flaw indefinitely, staying polished forever, keeps you permanently in the admiration category and never in the closeness category. And those are two very different outcomes people often confuse. The ones who end up both respected and deeply liked are usually the ones who let competence show first, without announcing it, and then let a real, unrehearsed crack show second, without apologizing for it. Not a manufactured flaw designed to seem humble, just an honest moment, allowed to exist in front of someone else instead of edited out. There is something almost freeing in understanding this correctly, because it means the pressure to be flawless was never working in your favor to begin with. The polished version of you that never trips, never admits confusion, never tells an embarrassing story is not the version people fall for. It is the version they keep at a respectful distance and quietly stop thinking about. The version that gets remembered, the version people actually want to be around, is the one competent enough to be trusted and human enough to be reached. Perfection was never the goal. It was only ever the floor you needed to stand on before you let anyone see the crack in it.